بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome to Finding Me in the ITV networks. I think today is perhaps my best day because I finally got to do something I've been wanting to do from the time that I started this program, but I never found the representation who would come across and agree to do this with me. So I feel very blessed, very honored to be in the beautiful city of Cape Town, although I still love Gauteng, and in this very, very special premises, which is the International Peace College of South Africa, where the knowledge that flows from here is something that will shake any avid student's mind. So with me I have two phenomenal guests, and that is Sheikh Talip, who is the principal of the Peace College of South Africa, and Jasser Auda. I've heard about him, I've read of his books, and alhamdulillah, through the barakah of the college, had the opportunity to sit in his classes for the last 2 days and also to learn from him. But today I get the opportunity to question him. Jasser Auda has written very many books, but what is relevant for us today, and I think to many Muslim women in South Africa who have faced this very contentious issue, and that is about the right to reclaim the spaces, specifically the mosque, and the role of Muslim women. So with that, I'd like to say assalamu alaikum to both of you, and thank you very much. You are brave men to be sitting here and to be agreeable to my questions, let me tell you. Jazakallah khair. Sheikh, I'd like to start with you, Sheikh. I mean, it's really a privilege and an honor. For years I've heard about the Peace College of South Africa. I've followed your initial struggles when you tried to establish it. Initially it was, just the college. Then you upgraded it in terms of the department. You got the recognition, you got the credentials, and your curricula is phenomenal. The lecturers who teach you are amazing. But has it been a challenge from the day of inception?
No, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the intention has always been for us to take Islam and make it as central and as mainstream to society as we ought to, as Muslims living as South Africans. The objective of taking Islamic education, and at a tertiary level in particular, to stand its ground in that particular space, had as a prerequisite that we find recognition, acknowledgement and accreditation and registration with obviously the Council of Higher Education, SACWA, etc. That has been an arduous, very tenuous and laborious process. It takes very, very long. But we deemed it a debt that we had to pay to the brilliant 350-year legacy that our forefathers have bequeathed on this community, and how do we take things then to the next level. And so we've always been, as a college formation, we had two seminaries here in the Cape called ICOSA. This is something,
I remember that.
A name that is recalled, as well as DAI. DAI was the Darul Arqam Islamic Institute, which at the time was a educational arm of the Muslim Judicial Council. They then came together and actually merged to form IPSA.
Okay.
And so wherever and whenever, obviously, we wanted to do things sort of more progressively, the question of recognition and accreditation was always something we had to answer. And if we wanted to go abroad, by the grace of Allah, even our processes of engaging with Dr. Jasser on projects that we wanted to get sort of more substantive collaboration on with like-minded institutions in different parts of the world, this issue is obviously very important.
So IPSA is the only Islamic university of its kind in South Africa, right? That has accreditation as well.
It has been until the end of last year.
Okay.
So we also have another institution here at the Cape called Medina Institute.
Oh yeah, that's
and
right.
Not doing promotions, right? But yeah, they're also here at the Cape, and so they've also reached that milestone.
Are they also accredited?
Yes, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is what we want to encourage.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Sheikh, or shall I say Professor Jasser Auda, Sheikh Istan used the word progressive. And I mean, as you know, I'm very particular about words. So progressive, yes, we become progressive in very many things, and we found that in the South African Muslim community, we were progressive in terms of our halal certification, in the way we proliferated our Muslim schools, things like that. But the actual concept of Islam and the progression of an Islamic understanding from an ethical viewpoint and what you speak about and what you've written about at the Maqasid Institute, I feel is very lacking, because there are still very many patriarchal interpretations of Islam. There are limitations, and there are it's not even conservative, it's just wrong interpretations of Islam that are imposed on the Muslim community, and that has come as a result perhaps of the colonization of Islam, the Indo-Pak influence, and of course today a very, very strong influence from the Wahhabi tradition. That's really decimating Islam in South Africa in a sense. But the younger generation are picking up that things are just not right, don't make sense, and they're either moving away from Islam or they're finding their own scholarship. So what do you feel is necessary in terms of education, or reclaiming that message, that authentic message of Islam? Like I always maintain, Islam doesn't need to be, relearned or reinvented. It's Muslims that need to fix themselves.
Yeah, of course, I agree with you 100% that Islam is not to be reinvented, but Islam is in need of renewal.
Yes.
And that's from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, "Man yujaddidu laha," those who renew Islam. To renew Islam is not to renew the teachings of Islam, but to renew the practicing of these teachings.
Yes.
And that is what I understand by progressive, if it's a positive. I don't use the word progressive or patriarchal. I try to be careful with concepts in the sense of using the Quranic concepts and the prophetic concepts. So the Quranic concept is to go back to the Prophet and ask, or to go back to the Quran, you go back to the Prophet and ask. So when we reclaim Islam, we are actually going back. We are supposed to be fundamentalists in the sense of going back to the fundamentals, rather than fundamentalists in a political way. That's not what I mean. When we go back to the fundamentals, we'll see that Prophet ﷺ is the first leader in humanity who gave women the rights, who did not differentiate between black and white or noble and non-noble. He made everybody equal, except with taqwa, or how pious or how good they are. And he revolutionized the way humanity works. We only want to go back to this. When we talk about mosques, we were talking about mosques in the seminar this morning. We just want to go back to the model of Muhammad's mosque. When we talk about society, we want to go back to Muhammad's society. Not necessarily in the material sense of it, because they had different currencies and different companies and different attires and different ways of doing things. But we go back to the morals of that. And if there is no evidence for something that people say from the Quran or the Sunnah of Muhammad ﷺ, then it's wrong. And yes, it's important to study the history of the Islamic law, but Islamic law is not the history of the Islamic law. There is a difference between fiqh and the history of fiqh. I study the history of fiqh, of course, so that I can do fiqh. But fiqh for today is going back to the original sources and judging the issues of today.
Sheikh Ihsan, considering what Professor Jasser just said, right? So when you're formulating your curricula, you have to consider all of these things. I mean, my biggest problem many, many years ago was which motivated me and put me on this path was I was listening to a Women's Day presentation on one of the Islamic radios, and the Sheikh was going on phenomenally about the status of women in Islam and speaking about all the rights that women had achieved. And the same Sheikh is the one who has oppressed women through his fatwas in South Africa, denied them the right to go to the mosque, denied women the right to attend the Eid Salah. Women should not get educated, should not go to university. It's haram to go to a secular university. Lots of things. When asked what Muslim women do, is that stay at home and bake and cook, and sell to house industries, etc. Yet it's the same kind of scholars who want to look for a female doctor when the wife is sick, or if you have a delivery, you want a gynecologist, female gynecologist. But then does that mean Muslim women should never engage in all of those things? So now when you're developing your curricula, are you cognizant of all of these issues that need to be taught, that need to be explained, as Jasser said, about the fiqh and the history of the fiqh and about Islamic history, and not just rote learning or reading the history, but actually critically interrogating that history?
So, as we've just started saying about, our kind of contextualization here in the South African context, as a person at a university, Quraysha herself, you'll understand that at tertiary level, when we're talking about presenting seerah, we're talking about presenting hadith, it's about skills.
Yes.
It's about development of skills. It's about critical skills. It's about cognitive skills. It's about reading skills and how those competencies are basically being sort of scaffolded from first year to second year to third year. And so clearly we have that very positive challenge that really forces us to evaluate how are we doing what we are doing. And so from a kind of skills-based development perspective, that is a structure which is very, very useful. When we've, by the grace of Allah, started also with our first offerings in the postgraduate level, we were then able to start the honors program, which was then the continuation of that. And by the way, inshallah, in the next few months we hope to have our master's program also accredited, which we've kind of given the description of a master's in applied Islamic thought.
This is a coursework master's?
It's a majority coursework, but there's also a dissertation component attached to it as well. And so the developmental dimensions then is from the structural side of things as well as from the content sort of side of things. And so clearly, especially where the postgraduate sort of development starts with the honors, and that is why our relationship with Dr. Jasser goes back a number of years. By the grace of Allah, we first became more intimate at the International Union of Muslim Scholars, where Dr. Jasser is a founder member as well, and our teachers are all there. And so when we then looked at the kind of framework and the approach to the processes of further development and research, we felt that from the most authoritative kind of terminologies out of our own tradition, that is going to be very useful for us to focus development through then Maqasidu Sharia as a framework, then presented itself as a very important kind of opportunity for us to pursue. Dr. Jasser and many others, even the current, by the grace of Allah, President of the International Union of Muslim Scholars, we are looking forward through the offices also of Dr. Jasser to get them here. So we're looking at Professor Dr. Ahmed Al-Raisuni, who are all sort of notable ulama and scholars in this very, very space.
And critical thinkers.
And so that's what the Maqasid does. It induces critical thinking because it asks the question, as Dr. Jasser always would say, the questions of why and what are the purposes, what are the objectives, as opposed to a very strict, exclusively literal type of reading of the Holy Quran. And so in addition to that, what we're also trying to do is to then layer and say that yes, in the first instance we are talking about people who are expected to be able to perform imamate duties within the Muslim community, for example, but we want that to then be layered on top of it with a social justice consciousness within that personality of a...
I have to stop here because we have to go to a break, but it's a very, very important point that you raised, that whole concept of bringing social justice into the way in which you incorporate Islam into your life. But we'll come back and just so we'll take that up with you as well. We'll see you after the break.
بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me. Today in the ITV networks, you're at IPSA, the International Peace College of South Africa, with Sheikh Talip and Professor Jasser Auda. And before we went on to the break, Sheikh Ihsan was speaking about how the mindset, the framing, the intention, and of course the coordination of the curricula was established here at IPSA. But then he raised a very important point, and that was about social justice. So Sheikh, before I come to Jasser, social justice is the history embedded into the blood and the veins of the Cape Muslims, from your heritage of slavery right through colonialism and apartheid. And of course, if we look at the beautiful history that we have of Sheikh Harun, which we discussed yesterday as well, certainly, without a doubt, there can be no South African citizenship there can be no Muslim identity without a recognition of social justice. And as Jasser will explain to us later, that's embedded in the maqasid of the Sharia as well. So when you say that you're incorporating this into the curricula so that your imams can speak about it, I'm very happy, because I'll be honest, when I listen to my husband and my son coming back from a Friday khutbah at many of our mosques, there is almost no discussion of social justice issues in our mosques. Basically, most of the khutbahs are relegated to the fiqh of Islam. If you looked at the time of the Rohingya Muslims, the challenges there, now and then you get something about Palestine. There's nothing about domestic wages, the minimum wages in South Africa, etc. And that all points to the human dignity, which is also one of the essence of the maqasid of Sharia. How do you find the ability of the student to relate to these issues, and do you find that it's important to contextualize so that it's not only Islamic, but that there's a contextual, political, social identity of Islam that's incorporated into the studies?
Yes, so again, the issue about relevance, the issue about context, these are intrinsic to the study of Islam. A fatwa to be formulated without context is folly. That is the equivalent of importing a fatwa that is somehow produced in some other part of the world and then making it apply somewhere where the context is completely different. Right. So contextualization, relevance to context, and the process of indigenization of our Islam. We don't want an Islam which we want to work towards an Islam where people can identify more as South Africans, identify more as Africans. And so all of that speaks to identity, as we've been doing in the past day or two as well. And so when we then look at the students' own development, and we're then saying that there is a need for us to make them understand that when we are talking about hadith, tafsir, when we're talking about seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, as an example, then women's issues, which is such a massive challenge in our country and globally, is an issue of Islam. That when we're talking about gender-based violence, when we're talking about domestic violence, then this is an issue that Islam is preeminently concerned about. And so how do we link the education process and the development of our students to the reality that's actually happening outside in society? And so how do we bring a blend between the verses of the Holy Quran that speaks about, like you've said, the Mufti is the one who inspired you to become, initiated into this direction, and yet he became also for you the same person who represented the kind of oppression in the same space of women's issues. So taking the theory and linking it to the reality, and linking it in terms of their own research that they then have to undertake, and their own assignments that they have to then produce as part of the components of the assessment and so forth. Bringing a blend into that kind of space, and then looking at the other kinds of issues which are massive challenges to our society. The issues of also drug abuse, the issues of, in our context here in the Cape and the rest of the country as well, of violence and crime. And gangsterism, and obviously drug abuse and gangsterism, how that goes together. And the ability for the student then to actually, there's a saying by, and I'm sure it's a far wider saying as well by Einstein, when he says that we know what we learn through doing. Yes. If you haven't practically done the stuff that you've theoretically, then you don't really know it. And there's no way that you can actually impart it.
I feel like I want to come to IPSA to study now, because I finally found what I'm looking for. Really, because for the longest of time I was in despair about Islamic education in South Africa, and I think next time we have to talk about like how we speak about changing higher education, decolonizing in terms of the university structure, but it's going to start in the primary levels as well, and in our Islamic schools, that Islamic history, fiqh, that it needs a whole decolonization of itself as well. So there's big struggles, but I'm glad that it's being done at the tertiary level already, and at the at the higher education level in terms of IPSA. So there's hope for us, Sheikh Jasser.
There is.
Yeah. So Jasser, I want to ask you now. Much of what Sheikh Raysan has spoken about brings me to a very, very difficult question that I'm faced with very often in South Africa. Now, you come from a region where you don't have this problem. From the Arab world, if I say per se, which is your indigeneity, you have an almost homogeneous kind of a society. South Africa is very diverse. And in my encounters at the university, and then later on when I started to do these different kinds of gatherings, the one problematic aspect that kept on rising was, especially from the young girls who were coming to Islam, from whether it was a Sotho background or a Xhosa background or a Zulu background, was one thing that always affected them when they told their parents that they'd taken Islam was they said, but Islam is an Indian religion. Now that comes back exactly to what I was saying about what that Mufti was speaking about, about women's rights, that Islam has no discrimination, that there's no racialization in terms of Islam, etc. But we practice all of that, which is totally opposite to the deen. And then when I studied at the madrasa, I remember that we touched the topic on maqasid, and I thought, oh God, I'll be honest, I used to sleep in all my faith classes. I studied 4 years at the Darul Uloom. I was wide awake in hadith and tafsir, but when it came to fiqh, I almost slept in every class. So I'm very bad with fiqh. But I always had this understanding that fiqh was boring, that fiqh was technical, that there was nothing exciting about fiqh until I read what you wrote about maqasid, and most importantly, what you said about it is that it's about the ethics of Islam. That Sharia is not law. Tell us a little bit more about maqasid.
Maqasid is not a new branch of knowledge in Islam. Maqasid has been part of the understanding of the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of Muhammad and part of the fiqh in every madhab and every school and every methodology of fiqh. But it's been played down with the decline of Islamic civilization. So you see, at the height of the Islamic civilization, in places like Iraq or Andalusia and so on, you find lots of research and books on maqasid. They take different names. They take the name of the maslaha or the common good. They take the name of the hikmah or the wisdoms and so on, and all the philosophical. And they take different terminologies, but the idea of the reason behind the rules and the spirit of the law and the why questions and the higher principles and the hierarchical thinking of values and all of that, this is an integral part of Islam and its scholarship at the heights of the Islamic civilization. At the low points, we had what's called taqleed, or imitation. And the imitation is, by definition, is not a method that asks why. You just imitate. And this is what we call the decline of the Islamic fiqh or usul al-hitat. That is what we are trying to fight today with the maqasid. We are trying to fight people blindly imitating others that they don't understand and they don't see the wisdom. We're not against Imam Shafi'i or Imam Malik or Imam Bukhari, because if Imam Bukhari is here today, he would have chapterized his book differently. He chapterized the book based on his reality and how he fits the hadith in his worldview. And if Imam Malik was here today, he would have applied maslaha, but in a different way. He would have added a chapter to his fiqh that is called social justice. That is a chapter of fiqh. Fiqh is boring because it was about history. And after the ibadat, which is an integral part of the life of every Muslim, how to pray and how to fast. But after that, you got into mu'amalat. And the chapters of mu'amalat are boring because they are irrelevant. The kinds of companies they talk about are no longer the kinds of politics and khilafah and this, and they're no longer how government works or policy. The kind of courts, the kind of even the agriculture and the environment and the water management, all of this is in our fiqh. But it's boring because it doesn't apply anymore. The environment is a very different story today. Economics is a very different story. And we need to renew these chapters. And that is what we try to do on an academic level with Maqasid Sharia and programs like IPSA's program, master's program that we were part of its design, or other programs around the world where we're trying to activate, realize Maqasid Sharia in the theory and through other organizations in different parts of the world as well, we're trying to activate and realize it in the practice.
Okay, so we're at the end now, so we're coming back for a second interview, where we'll then come into the real gender issues, where I'm going to put my teeth into it. Shah, just to conclude, would you say that ijtihad is necessary today?
Absolutely. The whole process of the development of our fiqh has been one where the ulama are very clear that you will continuously, this is human nature, it's the law of Allah, you'll be faced with new issues that weren't there before, that weren't encountered. The whole phenomenon of an alim from a previous era writing another commentary on top of that, another commentary on top of that, is them trying to contextualize the issues that have been said 3 centuries, 4, 5, Allah forbid, 8 centuries ago, and then to bring more relevance to it contextually. Right. Those are processes of ijtihad. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah had said that qiyas in itself is ijtihad. So those are the processes where you're trying to analogize, you're making analogies in terms of what had gone before, but the issues, the manifestations are different.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. But when we come back, I just want to start with this particular question with you, Jasser, and that is that there's a strong dogmatic mindset in South Africa to say that if you're Hanafi, you follow only the Hanafi way. If you're Shafi, you follow only the Shafi way. And if they come to clash all, and then we literally come to blows with each other, how do we solve that problem? But we're going to ask that question in the next interview. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا فيما